It could have happened decades earlier. The tragedy led to the death of Prince Afonso when he was about to marry Princess Isabel in 1493. Prince Miguel, son of D. Manuel and of the same princess, sworn heir to the Portuguese crown, already accepted by Castile and Aragon, died in childhood in 1500. Prince Carlos, son of Philip II and Infanta Di Maria, also sadly went mad and died in 1568. Any one of these could have been destined to unite the crowns of the peninsular kingdoms. The ultimate goal of the family policy pursued since Dom Afonso V of Portugal, Isabel I of Castile, and Ferdinand II of Aragon. The ruling family, since it was, after all, a single one, persisted in preparing for that eventual union. Philip II was finally the one favored by fate. Philip II is king, sovereign over others with any title of Castile, Aragon, Naples, Sicily, Milan, Franche-Comté, the Low Countries, and the American territories of the Crown of Castile, among other titles of lesser importance. Without a doubt, he was the most powerful sovereign in Europe during the second half of the 16th century, ruling over immense territories that required policies suited to different times and places. His governance was characterized by a sense of responsibility that never allowed him to rest. Diligent to the point of exhaustion, he did not rely on a valido, a royal favorite, nor did he allow a close collaborator to decide for him. Assisted by a narrow circle of people in whom he trusted and whom he disliked replacing, he delegated tasks, titles, and privileges to those who were to choose and frame the solutions to be adopted for the issues submitted to them for study. Consultations and reports descended to the councils, and then returned to his hands to take the form of decisions. These he reserved for himself. Any matter so submitted, if it was not of immediate urgency, he could personally address, understanding it in all its details, without intermediaries. Mastering both geography and politics, he sought to know minutely the territories he governed, striving to be well informed. By order of Philip II, an extraordinary collection of data on Castile was carried out, the topographical relations, which compiled beautiful maps, such as those of the Atlas of El Escorial, in which the Iberian Peninsula as a whole was recorded for the first time. Bureaucracy gained strength under his name, within limits that he himself set, trusting in the applied criteria of laws and provisions. His personal government style, more authoritarian than absolute in modern Europe, was based on the careful deployment of paths and processes, and on the awareness of the extraordinary diversity of the lands and peoples over whom he ruled. Son of Emperor Charles V and Princess Isabel of Portugal, daughter of Dom Manuel, Philip was born in Valladolid on May 21st, 1527. Still a child, he was orphaned of his mother, and had brief and infrequent contact with his father, occupied outside Castile with the complications of imperial politics. He governed early as regent, 1543 to 1548 and 1551 to 1554, and his father and tutors always sought to educate and guide him to properly fulfill the role that dynastic destiny awaited him. Cultivated and curious, he learned much from his travels to Italy, Germany, the Low Countries, and England, where he was consort. He definitively came to the Iberian Peninsula in 1559, already king since Charles V's abdication in 1556, and devoted himself diligently, from the capital, to the governance of his realms. Settling in Madrid, 1561, he exercised his royal command there, with faith in God, who could do all and governed everything. Philip II is the heir of the emperor, head of the great Habsburg family, or Austrias, and with the family governs a good part of the world that fell to them. Maria, widowed Empress of Germany, governs the Low Countries. Joanna, widowed Princess of Portugal, for several years regent of Castile. Catherine, mother of D. João III of Portugal, and regent during the minority of D. Sebastian. John of Austria, the victor of Lepanto, also governs the Low Countries. Alexander Farnese, Prince of Parma, is appointed to the missions there. Charles Emmanuel, Duke of Savoy, married the Infanta Caterina Michaela. Albert of Austria, Archduke and Vice-King of Portugal. The web woven around Philip II, if compared to his bureaucratic and family ties at the center of Castile, is, in fact, an image worth noting. On August 3, 1578, Philip II received, at the Escorial, news of the disaster of Alcácer Quibir. It was, if not the impossible, certainly also beyond his immediate duty to act. Soon, he took the necessary steps to present himself as the true heir of his uncle the Cardinal, sending his ambassador to clarify in Lisbon the conditions laid out by the King of Portugal's testament, through which Portugal came to be governed by the Castilian monarch. When, immediately afterward, his succession rights were challenged by D. Antonio, Prior of Crado, Philip II was ready. The first obstacle to overcome was that of Cardinal D. Henrique, who, although already old, left no will or successor. After his death, his testament, reaffirming the cause of the King of Spain, gained new strength. This was the long and patient plan that had been prepared. To begin with, he sought and obtained the support of the formidable Company of Jesus and other religious orders. Yet, given the existing Portuguese nobility, this was not a new alliance. For Philip II, the widows and mothers of the dead or captive men in Africa would be easy to win over. The captured could be redeemed and bought back. Support from great merchant houses was guaranteed from the start. The peace agreement was indispensable for Portuguese trade with India, while the business of Portuguese merchants could benefit from unity with Castile and the trade connections with the Indies of Castile. Both Portuguese and Castilians stood to gain greatly, and advantages could arise for all from that union. Among the closest were those who did not oppose the planned expansion, and among the more distant, those lands that were to be reconquered by Portugal. By 1580, Philip II and his counsellor and collaborator, Antoine Perrenot, Cardinal of Granvelle, the energetic organizer of Charles V's imperial advances, found themselves facing the exile of the Duke of Alba, who was given command of the army that would open for him, militarily, the path to the throne of Portugal. Philip II entered Portugal at the end of 1580, not as a conqueror, but as a legitimate king, as some had long sought to prove that he rightfully was. Patiently, he waited in Badajoz from May 22nd to December 5th for the military and political outcome. On that date, the judgment of the governors recognized him as the rightful heir. On August 4th, the Lisbon Chamber, like almost all others except Evora, governed by desembargadores, accepted Philip II's rule. He was recognized as King of Portugal on April 16th, 1581, in Tomar, where the Cortes were held to formalize his acknowledgement. Philip II reinstated in his favor the privileges that King Manuel had previously granted to the city of Lisbon and to Portugal as a whole. Dom Miguel de Silva, long before, had already prepared for various writings on the praise of kingship. Philip had his own sense of the political value of such gestures. He made a solemn entry into Lisbon, with all the pomp of triumph, on the 29th of June, 1581, in the company of his son, Prince Philip, the future Philip III. He went to the Geronimos monastery, where he attended Mass and offered thanks for the kingdom that God had placed under his obedience. The city received him festively, although its people watched the spectacle in silence, and perhaps in doubt. The new king soon confirmed the privileges and exemptions of the city, the ecclesiastical institutions, and the religious orders, granting amnesties. At the same time, Philip II began organizing the administration of the Portuguese kingdom, giving instructions that would integrate it within his vast monarchy while preserving its distinctive autonomy. The apparatus of government was centered in Lisbon, and the main offices of justice, finance, and the navy remained largely composed of Portuguese officials. In 1582 and 1583, Philip II returned to Lisbon after traveling through parts of Portugal. He then decided to go back to Castile, entrusting the kingdom to a council presided over by Cardinal Alberto of Austria, his nephew, who served as viceroy. The king appointed his first viceroy in Lisbon, the Cardinal Archduke Albert of Austria, son of Maximilian II and Maria, daughter of Charles V. Albert arrived in Lisbon in 1583 after D. Cristóvão de Moura's governorship, and remained until 1593. Later, when he married Isabel Clara Eugenia, Philip's daughter, he was given Flanders as a dowry and became its governor. In the meantime, Philip II visited Lisbon 3 times, the first from 1581 to 1583, the second in 1589, and the third in 1593, staying for extended periods. The Portuguese court thus came into contact with the broader European world of Philip II's dominions. The court's ceremonies, the strict discipline of the royal household, and the use of Castilian as the language of administration all reflected the political unification of the Iberian crowns. During his stay in Lisbon, Philip II initiated various reforms, seeking to integrate Portugal into his vast empire without compromising its specific institutions and traditions. He maintained the structure of Portuguese administration and justice, as well as the independence of the overseas territories, the House of India, and the Casa da Mina, which continued to be managed by Portuguese officials. However, the viceroy's power was extensive, and the crown's officials were closely linked to Castilian authority. This led to certain tensions, especially among the Portuguese nobility, who had expected greater autonomy. The political importance of this new regime was reflected in the creation of the Relação do Porto, a higher court modeled on that of Lisbon. From Madrid, the government supervised the work of Portuguese councils, the House of India, and other major institutions. Albert of Austria was one of Philip II's most trusted political disciples, one who combined discipline with adaptability and firmness. A man of energy and vision, he helped consolidate royal authority in Portugal while maintaining local cooperation. Lisbon was the center of his administration, which also oversaw the restoration of order in the Azores after the resistance of D. Antonio, prior of Crato. Albert governed through Portuguese officials such as D. João de Borja, D. Diogo Lopes de Souza, D. Cristóvão de Moura, D. Francisco de Mascarenhas, the Count of Portalegre, Dom Diogo da Silva, and the Count of Vila da Horta, among others. Philip II's political administration was marked by continuity rather than rupture. The Spanish crown sought to consolidate the union of the Iberian kingdoms through a system of loyal and experienced administrators. Portugal's political independence was formally affected by the dynastic union. However, the union did not mean the extinction of its institutions or a loss of autonomy in managing its empire. On the contrary, the Portuguese administration maintained much of its character and specific organization, though increasingly subject to the centralizing tendencies of Madrid. The union allowed Spain to strengthen its control over Atlantic trade routes and the strategic sea lanes to Asia. However, it also provoked deep unease in Portugal, particularly among those who saw the country's integration into the Spanish monarchy as a threat to its identity and overseas empire. The amphibious operation to reconquer the Azores from the partisans of D. Antonio in 1583 marked the final phase of Portugal's integration. This operation, led by Don Álvaro de Bazan, the Marquis of Santa Cruz, demonstrated Philip II's military superiority and the determination of the Spanish crown to impose unity. The amphibious operation to reconquer the Azores from the partisans of D. Antonio in 1583 marked the last phase of Portugal's integration. This operation, led by Don Álvaro de Bazan, The Marquis of Santa Cruz demonstrated Philip II's military superiority and the determination of the Spanish crown to enforce unity. It was this same Marquis who was supposed to have led the Great Armada, the vast naval force sent against England in 1588. The preparations for this grand expedition were enormous. Shipyards in Castile, Portugal, and Naples worked ceaselessly to build, arm, and supply the fleet. Lisbon and Seville became the main centers for provisioning and organization. In the port of Sagres, as early as 1587, the first squadrons were assembled, and a large armament effort began, a project that would culminate in the colossal undertaking to transport entire fleets across the seas under one unified command. The troops from the peninsula were to join those from Flanders and England, while the transfer was also meant to reinforce the army that was moving from Flanders to London and to make the occupation of the English capital possible. London was the main military objective, the heart of the enemy's civil resistance. As Sir Walter Raleigh would later say, "Whoever controls London holds all of England." The enormous effort involved in transporting troops from the peninsula to the banks of the Thames, gathering the fleet in Lisbon, and preparing for that great transoceanic operation resulted in delays and difficulties that prevented the Spanish ships from leaving the port until 1588. The Spanish Armada had 154 vessels and roughly 30,000 men on board, mostly from Andalusia and Lisbon. Its mission was to transport the army of the Duke of Parma, some 20,000 men stationed in Flanders, across the Channel under the protection of the Armada, to land in England and occupy the capital. Logistically, the operation was extraordinarily complex. It required precise timing, which was hindered by the weather and the size of the fleets. When the Armada left Lisbon, it was delayed by storms in the Bay of Biscay. Later, when it approached Plymouth, the English fleet, commanded by Medina Sidonia, adopted a harassing and agile tactic, exploiting its lighter and more maneuverable ships. Meanwhile, the English, led by Drake, Hawkins, and Frobisher, kept the Spanish under constant pressure through artillery skirmishes and fireship attacks in Calais. Unable to unite with the Duke of Parma's forces in Flanders, Medina Sidonia had to withdraw northward, rounding Scotland and Ireland, losing ships and men to storms and shipwrecks. The defeat of the Armada was caused by adverse weather. Although the destruction of the Armada in 1588 represented a blow to Spanish objectives, it did not end Philip II's maritime ambitions, nor did it break the economic foundation of his empire. In 1589, Philip had another fleet prepared in Lisbon, and English forces attempted a counterattack by landing in Coruña and Peniche, only to suffer a huge defeat, more serious than the Spanish Armada. Philip II died, comforted by the faith of his spirit, convinced that the sins of his kingdoms had prevented victory, but also trusting that God's mercy would reward his perseverance. His final illness, which lasted nearly 50 days, was met with the same sense of ritual and devotion that characterized his entire reign. He died at El Escorial, surrounded by relics, his confessor, and his closest family, in the chamber of the monastery palace that he himself had built. He died on September 13, 1598, after reigning for 42 years, leaving behind the most extensive and diverse empire the world had yet seen, one in which the sun truly never set.